Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome everybody from whatever part of the world that you are joining us. Greetings from Nairobi, where I am. My name is Divi Siaraba. I'm a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this special session on the impact of COVID on the farming communities. I would say since the last 18 months, the global pandemic and the sort of first, second, and maybe even third order impacts of not just the pandemic, but consequently actions that have been taken by governments have impacted the agri-food sector in multiple ways. I like to say it that the pandemic has been a stress test to the agri-food sector like none other. There is no greater challenge to the agri-food sector than what we face today through the global pandemic. Of course, we're still operating within the existential threat of climate change. We are working to ensure that we increase productivity and competitiveness of the agriculture sector to ensure that African economies feed themselves and possibly feed the world. Africa has the potential to be a breadbasket to the rest of the world. And we're going to hear today from eminent speakers to discuss not just the challenges, but the nuance and where the opportunities are in ushering in this prosperity narrative. To kick things off, I would like to invite a special guest, Julie Green, who is the Vice President, Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Olam, to give the opening remarks on the survey presentation. Julie, you have the floor.
Food and agribusiness company. In Africa, we're working in a number of countries across the supply chain, sourcing products such as cocoa, coffee, cotton, grains, and rice and nuts. And we aim to achieve a positive impact for our farming communities, for our planet, and all our stakeholders. Now, we have some 500,000 farmers in Africa that we're supporting through various programs, and we're sourcing from a broader network of over 5 million farmers around the world. And of course, with COVID, we've all felt the squeeze at different parts of the supply chain, and we asked our farmers, where are your challenges? What are you experiencing? So that we could see how best we could partner with them and help to address those challenges. So I'm here to share with you today the results of our most recent survey. This is the second one we've done. We did a prior one in June of last year. So a couple of months ago in March, we surveyed 3,432 farmers across 19 countries worldwide. In Africa, that was 1,663 farmers covering 7 countries, 6 crops, 40% women, 7% youth. And we asked farmers, what are the impacts of COVID right now on your income, your farm production, your nutrition, and food security? What are the coping strategies that you might be taking to manage the challenges that you're facing? And have there been any impacts on the rights of your children? The key finding is that in Africa, 68% of the farmers reported that their income is still reduced in the prior few months to the survey as compared to the same time period before COVID. About half of the farmers are also saying they saw less demand for their produce. So why are farmers earning less money? Well, half of the farmers said that they had produced less on their farms in the past season. Excuse me. And as you can see, this result is being felt around the world, but the factors are being reported by more farmers in Africa than the farmers that we surveyed in Latin America or Southeast Asia. So the factors they cited were, in particular, 47% saying farm inputs like seeds and fertilizers were less available in the local market. 42% said it was harder to find laborers. And 55% said they had less money available to afford farm inputs or hired labor. And depending on where we were, this was often a reflection of in the prior season, they had earned less money because of all the disruptions felt from COVID. And they were feeling those results again as they were coming up into the next harvest season or the next planting season, depending on where they're located. So we also found there were effects on the nutrition and food security. In Africa, about 3 out of 5 farmers said they were eating less diverse diets in the prior 30 days to the survey, and also that they had insufficient food stored. And a number of farmers, most noticeably in Nigeria and in Cote d'Ivoire, reported that they had food stored, but it was spoiled or infested. Because we were a bit surprised when we saw insufficient food stored. It's March. It's not typically yet into the heart of the hungry season for West Africa. What's going on? But in some of these cases, it pointed to some storage challenges. And that also points to possibilities for action, which is, of course, part of the reason we're doing the survey, to figure out what is it that we can take action on. A really unfortunate or sad result of COVID, with the schools being closed still in many cases, and with, again, the problems we just saw on the previous slide, less access to labor, less money to afford labor. 1 out of 3 farmers' households who have children under the age of 15 said their children are spending more time working to help out with the family income. In terms of coping strategies, over 56% of farmers indicated that they were borrowing more money than usual. Again, not surprising from the prior results we saw. About 50% said they were finding alternative sources of income. In some cases, diversifying their crops. A number of cases, it was starting new enterprises or taking day labor jobs. And unfortunately, 1 in 5 farmers reported that they had to sell assets, sometimes even their farming and transportation assets, in order to cope with a reduced income. So we can see a number of the things that the farmers were telling us. We are no longer getting support from our family members and our children who used to send us money. People are afraid to go out because of COVID, so it's hard to find labor. There's fewer buyers coming, and when the buyers come, they don't have cash. Sales prices are lower. Now, who are the most vulnerable farmers? So this slide brings in, again, the results from our whole global survey. And you can see the red dots are all the supply chains that we surveyed in Africa. The yellow ones are in Latin America, and the blue ones are mainly in Asia. And up in this top right corner, you can see that in these supply chains, more than 50% of the surveyed farmers reported impacts across all these major areas, impacts on their income, their production, their food security, and their nutrition. And as you can see, that's all those countries are, all the supply chains are in Africa. Nigeria, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, and DRC standing out, and Chad not far from there as well. So the risks to farmers and communities is that this lower income is reducing their access today to adequate diets, and it's triggering the sales of some of their productive assets. The lower incomes and reduced production and sales of their productive assets may trap some of these farmers in a downward spiral because they have less to reinvest in their future production. And short-term measures such as school closures and long-standing issues like undiversified farms or income sources multiply this challenge. So we may need to work even more extensively, more cooperatively, and in a more sustained manner than what we may have expected a year ago in order to foster sustainable livelihoods. So some of the key learnings and action areas to help farmers to safeguard their farming investments and prevent a downward spiral of economic uncertainty and low productivity. We can improve farmers' access to loans, labor, and inputs. For example, financing plows for communities and inputs and equipment, offering trainings, mobilizing youth groups to offer pruning services. We can support crop and income diversification efforts, and we can support farmers to have access to the knowledge and technology to better store and preserve the food that they've harvested. We can harness the power of digital tools to enable farmers to receive information and advice, whether it's agronomic advice or market information, or also health and medical advice. And we can work with communities and farmer groups and schools and others to address the potential increase in the risk of child labor by improving awareness, strengthening monitoring systems, supporting access to schools and education, and establishing safe centers, especially for the children of laborers, especially the children of migrant laborers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that presentation, Julie. And so without further ado, I would like to re-invite Julie, Vice President, Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Olam, to a panel, and also introduce other members of the panel. On this panel, we have Ifi Umuna, co-CEO of Nourishing Africa. It's good to have you, Ifi.
Great to be here.
We have Jihan Ajiti, Head of Business Development at OCP Africa. Good to see you again, Jihan.
Good to see you.
Okay, we also have Samuel Zotefe, Regional Manager, Agriculture and Agribusiness, Sub-Saharan Africa at the IFC. Good to have you here, Sam.
Good to see you again.
And finally, thank you, Sam. And finally, we have Kagweria Kume, Head Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation. Good to have you here, Kagweria.
Indeed, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you, WC.
Okay, so let's kick things off, Julie, with you. You just gave this excellent presentation. There is the state of the world as it is, and the one we wish it to be. Initiating this global survey demonstrates that the private sector is indeed taking leadership, much needed leadership for agriculture transformation, especially for global agribusiness with historical origins in Nigeria. Olam, of course, as we may know, started in Nigeria in 1989. The surveys of June 2020, the global, and the March 2021 are highly commendable. They give a picture of the state of operations of farmers, as well as an indication of the health of global supply chains. Julie, you've mentioned these 4 key learnings: improving access to loans, labor, and inputs, supporting crop and income diversification efforts, harnessing digital tools, and also working to reduce the risk of child labor on farms. From your perspective, leading a global agribusiness, how has the shock from 2020 and as it continues impacted your medium to long-term view of markets in terms of productivity and consumer demand?
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, we felt this global squeeze from reduced demand and challenges on trade at certain periods during the pandemic. Overall, our medium and long-term view remains unchanged in terms of demand for the sorts of crops that we're involved in any case. And in terms of productivity, perhaps the plus side, if we can say there's a plus side to the pandemic, is that it's forced us to be more innovative. It's forced us to put in plan ideas that we had, and we said now we actually need to work on this. So, for example, we have a variety of digital tools that we use for registering farmers, keeping track of our activities, and facilitating market access as well. We were able to harness these digital tools and very quickly, adapt, put in a little code so that we were able to send out SMS messages initially on COVID related advice, but then on agronomy related advice and training, things that we would normally do face to face, but that we were, of course, we're still continuing to visit farmers, but we were able to amplify our impact and reduce a bit the risks of frequent visits by harnessing these devices. That was built, though, on predicated on having a strong field experience and relationships with the farmers in the first place. Other things that we did to look at access to inputs and labor resources. For example, at our cotton business in Cote d'Ivoire, we facilitated access to tractors and financing for that, and we upscaled those programs. In Nigeria, rice, we looked more at reducing post-harvest loss through mechanical threshers and also providing access to youth jobs in that way. So it really helped to prompt us to use our tools kits in a different way and to expand our efforts. And I think in the long run, that's going to help to boost the productivity on the African continent.
Thank you very much, Julie. And it's good to hear that Olam is adopting to a more, taking on more digital tools to increase productivity, even in the middle of a global pandemic. As we all know, we're seeing the emergence of new variants, which indicates that the world may remain under progressive states of lockdown or restrictions for the foreseeable future. Ife, you just heard what Julie, or how Julie has described the state of the farmers that Olam sampled in the survey. From the perspective of SMEs, how do you see them? Do you see them adapting to the shock of this pandemic, or are we learning any lessons that SMEs require to thrive in the face of a shock such as this? Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks. So we saw that in the beginning of the pandemic, at least 50% of the SMEs that we engaged with regularly had to close down either indefinitely or for a short period, given that they just could not absorb the shock of the pandemic. But the ones that were able to, stay afloat, find a way to continue, were those that quickly incorporated tech and innovation into their business models. This could be if you were in retail, even if you didn't have an app, you were now taking orders via WhatsApp and you were using local transportation or whatever transportation you could to deliver your goods. You could be in production and incorporate some way of ensuring that your team could continue throughout the various lockdowns and the stay-at-home orders. So one thing we have quickly seen is that there have been businesses, SMEs in particular, that have thrived during this pandemic. And when you look at how they were able to do that, it was through the use of simple technology oftentimes, and innovation in how you now change your business model. So I think moving forward, that's one thing we've seen a lot of SMEs tap into. We've also seen them try and actively pivot their business models to ensure that they are more resilient to future shocks in the future, because they never want to go through this period again. So we've seen a sense of taking this period as an opportunity to change the way they do things for the better moving forward. And that's something we're very excited to see.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ife. It's interesting to hear that the SMEs that have thrived are those that have incorporated tech and innovation into their business practices. And we're not talking about technologies that are far away from everyone. So social media platforms, communications channels, easily accessible to everyone who has a mobile device is a tool that you've used as an example. Good to know. Kagwiria, now you've heard, not just from Julie talking about what Olam's doing, but also from Ife on the perspective of SMEs, how the adoption of technological innovations have allowed SMEs to thrive. You work in the philanthropic space. How do you see philanthropies, supporting entrepreneurs during this evolving? I wouldn't just use the pandemic as an immediate example, but going forward for future shocks and stresses, to build resilience and ensure that entrepreneurs thrive in the face of future shocks and stresses. how do you see philanthropies supporting private entrepreneurs through catalytic capital?
Thank you, Debisi. I think you put it so well when you say that COVID-19 has just exposed major food systems failure. But for us, and specifically for Rockefeller Foundation, it's just required us to continue campaigning that we have to address the entrenched issues in the food system. So specifically what we are doing in terms of working or responding to COVID-19, I'll speak about 3 areas. Maybe I'll begin with the first one on our SMEs. One of the areas that we noticed, one of the things that happened, or the main disruptions, was just access to food, and especially the closure of markets, which were considered central in terms of the distribution of food. And then just the way our supply chains are designed, they're quite fragmented. So one of the areas that we are responding for there is reimagining and thinking about how we can build the future urban markets in the areas in which we work in, whereby even though contact is inevitable, they're able to be resilient in future, but also promote high standards of quality, sanitation, comfort, but also integrate new technologies such as waste management, water management, also thinking about how you can incorporate renewable energy into this. In urban markets, why we thought this was important is that first, they employ almost 50% to 60% of the people who work there are women, but also these are most SMEs are delivering or working with these markets. Another area that we're working with, though, I think similar to most people, when COVID-19 came, the short-term solution was, let's see if we can get funding out there, short-term working capital. But we've seen that it's actually required a longer-term response. As you know, our work is mainly around improving access to nutritious foods. And we're trying to think about how we can work with foundations who or trying to work with other people of similar minds to design financial mechanisms where we're not just focused on the impact and the financial gains, but also nutritional outcomes as well, and looking for the SMEs who are working in this space.
That's a great insight, Kugweria. Future urban markets. I really like that thinking, and we're seeing a recurring theme here in adopting technology and technological inputs to tide one over in the face of shocks and stresses. Jihan, I want to bring you on here and use an example that Ife might be able to speak to. In Nigeria, when at the onset of the pandemic in March, April, the government imposed restrictions on movement of goods, people, goods, and services. And that immediately led to a breakdown in farmers getting access to inputs, but also farmers being able to distribute or transport produce from farms to markets. And we saw the second order impact of people losing access to healthy, nutritious food. Of course, you know, the healthiest, most nutritious foods are the perishables, and they have a very short shelf life. And if they can't be moved from farms to markets, and most of the markets, of course, are in urban areas, we had this perverse situation where urban areas were completely cut off from food supply chains. Now, is there anything from OCP's perspective that you are learning in how you improve supply chain management in the face of this continuing pandemic, but also for future shocks and stresses? How do we ensure that we fortify our supply chains and insulate them from these shocks in the future? Jihan.
Thank you, Debisi. So you're right. Logistics are very, very important for our business and for fertilizer specifically, but for all inputs. And we were kind of scared at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the restrictions that were applied in different countries and even in Morocco. We were kind of scared to see major shortages and major disruptions in supply chains. But to be honest, it wasn't that catastrophic, let's say. Once there was a sense of awareness of the importance of still having priority goods still moving. So in some countries, even in Nigeria, you cited, there were announcements of restriction of movements, but just after there were amendments and they were specifying some products that were listed as being able to move within the country. And also in terms of the international supply chain, which is key as well, there weren't any major shortages. It was quite smooth, and we were kind of surprised. We were also scared that it will have an impact on the production because of, for example, Morocco, where we have most of our production plants. We had a very severe lockdown and very severe restrictions of movements for a long period of time. But at OCP, we managed to put in place a crisis team that was able to make sure to ensure continuity in our production, because we are one of the major suppliers in Africa, but also in the world. So we had also a responsibility to be able to continue that. And I believe across the industry, all the players played along, and we were able to maintain a fair amount of the supply on fertilizer side. But where you're right, it's on the logistics inland. Even if the fertilizer were kind of having been granted a special permits as a primary good, because of the lack of labor, because of the let's say the less efficient logistics, because of the trucks that were not filled at 100% and they returned empty, there were an increase in prices, in the costing, of the logistics, that they indeed had an impact in the availability of the products at the end of the day. So there was a higher risk aversion of all players across the supply chain and the distribution to be able to make some of the movements that they were planning on making before. Maybe just another emphasize, because I think, as you said, there will be other shocks coming. And I believe that the first shock was kind of a preparation, a training for all of us and all players on what can happen and how to react. So really, I believe, in a positive note, that both the private sector, the governments and the institutions are kind of quite well prepared to at least have a sense of what is coming, which we didn't have at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's I'm very positive in our capabilities as a community and as a continent to be able to face that, especially on the logistics side as well. And I'd like also to specify that we've seen a change, a shift in the government because of the insecurity on the international supply chain and also in the imports of the food, which is a huge, let's say, budget today in Africa with over $30 billion of food imports across the continent. There was a sense of emergency in pushing a local production. So there were emergency response plans promoting local production and increasing productivity within the countries, which means that there is a kind of a realization that we have to balance a bit our food security with food imports and having also securing an improved and a modernized local production.
No, thank you very much, Jihad. These are great to see that the private sector and the agribusinesses are responding to these shocks and are evolving their strategies, corporate strategies. Sam, I hope you haven't been feeling too lonely. I'm coming to you now. Now, the global agri-food sector contributes 10% of global GDP. The global agri-food sector is valued at around $8 trillion. Now, we know that at the onset of the pandemic, the IFC provided an $8 billion fast-track financial support through 4 financing facilities to existing clients to help sustain economies and preserve jobs during the pandemic. And of course, we know the poorest and most vulnerable countries have been hit hardest. Now, from the IFC's perspective, how much from the global support has been allocated to Africa, and how well are countries responding to the stimulus? Is this working?
No. First of all, let me start off by saying that I really want to commend Olam for the survey, and more importantly, for all the work that they continue to do to support small farmers in their own supply, in their own operation, their own supply chains, but just highlighting, through the survey, some of the challenges that small farmers are facing so that we can address them. Yes, indeed, IFC did approve almost $8 billion as financing to support countries and economies to quickly recover. And the way that we did it was provide this support to our existing clients, go to our existing clients to make sure that they would have the kind of liquidity that they need to continue to operate, to support their operations. But I must say that apart from that 8 billion that you know of, IFC also approved another $400 million. And that $400 million was what we call the base of the pyramid facility, because we wanted to do something extra. We wanted to support small businesses that have also been hardest hit by the pandemic, especially those in the poorest and the fragile countries. And these facilities were going to be channeled through microfinance institutions, non-bank financial institutions, and banks that are really focused on lending to the MSMEs and to small farmers. Now, we have to face it. That the issue confronting us is not just agribusiness; it's also health. You need a healthy community to be able to go to the farm and produce and so on. And so, because of that, the IFC also launched another $4 billion of a global health platform. $4 billion of a global health platform to be made up of $2 billion from our own account. And then we're going to mobilize another $2 billion from other DFIs, from other DFIs to support improvement in the healthcare supply systems in these countries, because it's just important to also address the issues around healthcare. As you try to tackle issues around agribusiness. As of mid-June. And here I'm referring to the 8.4 billion, that is the 8 billion COVID rapid response facility plus the 400. We had committed 5.3 billion. 5.3 billion had been committed globally. And out of that 5.3 billion, 1.3 billion was committed to projects and to countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, to your question, just for you to know that the facilities, that is the 8.4 billion facilities, was not pre-allocated to countries per se. So there wasn't a specific allocation to Africa, but we always knew that either countries, FCS countries, especially countries in Africa, would continue to be priority for the utilization of the facilities, and that has been the case. Now, the other thing too is that learning from our experience from the 2008 financial crisis, we found out that to really get economies going, really get countries going, we needed to leverage financial institutions. We needed to leverage the financial institutions in their respective countries. And so a bulk of this facility that we put in place were channeled through the financial institutions in respective countries. So like I said earlier, we don't lend directly to government. We typically, as an institution, don't lend directly to government. We focus on the private sector, and most of these facilities have gone through the financial institutions, also directly to private sector. And I'm very pleased to say that we see the facilities are having the kind of impact that we expected, given the level of utilization that I've just highlighted.
Thank you very much, Sam. And it's good to note to get the status of what the $8 billion facility, where it's been allocated to, and also the emphasis on the $4 billion global health platform. That's really exciting to hear. Iffy, I want to bring you back in now. Now you've heard what Sam has talked about in ensuring that there's liquidity available for the financial sector or for private entrepreneurs. If you, or not even if you, because you are sitting in an important position, bringing together SMEs and advocating on their behalf. If you had a message for government at this point, is there any core key message that you would want governments to hear? Say a member of government was watching this seminar. What message would you want them to take away on behalf of SMEs that you represent? Over to you.
I think for the SMEs that we work with, one of the most consistent pleas would be, or to government, would be for enabling policies that are consistent, that are fair, that engage entrepreneurs and agribusinesses in a way that they would then be able to, scale. So that could be within Nigeria, ensuring that, when we have these policies that are implemented or that are discussed in a day and implemented the next day, that there's more time for entrepreneurs to really, get their ducks in a row. That when policies are being made, that agribusinesses have a seat at the table and are there to discuss how that directly affects them, because oftentimes you see that the bigger corporations and the bigger businesses do have a seat at the table or are able to discuss this with government. So my plea to government would be two things. One, to have enabling policies, and the second would be to ensure that you have SMEs at the table when you are creating these policies and you consult with them.
Okay. So SMEs should be consulted in the development and design of policies. That is quite key. Before we move into the second phase of our discussion as a panel, I would like to invite members of the audience listening in to please type in your questions. Our panelists are eager to engage with you and respond to your questions. Kagwiria, thinking about this, the possibility of us having a 2021 into 2022 being a repetition of 2020 into 2021, meaning we have another 12 months of restrictions on movement. Are there strategies that you feel that private entrepreneurs and or governments need to adapt to ensure that they are not caught unawares a second time? I think 2020, we might say 2020 was a shock. Right now, we're in a stress situation. It's no longer a shock, We're all aware that we're in a global pandemic now, and we're aware.
That's correct. We're definitely in a stress period.
I think Aguirre is having connection issues. If I may pivot and move that question to Julie. Julie, from an agribusiness perspective, of course I muted myself. Julie, as an entrepreneur, are there any strategies that you adopted in 2020 that you are still taking as Olam, or are you looking to evolve into or are you seeing this as more of a situation that we will have to live with for another couple of years? Therefore, what impact does that have on how you engage through your supply chain? Are you investing more in digital technologies for your partners, or are you seeing any changes in your corporate strategy in that respect? Over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I think that we are investing more, we're exploring more in terms of how can we harness technology to, for example, technology that farmers can put in their own hands to identify diseases, things like this. It's stuff that's needed anyway. It's stuff that we have the capabilities to deliver now, but definitely with COVID, we need to see this as a way to deliver farmer services differently. Another thing that we're looking at is really tailoring our approaches much more and segmenting our farmers. This was something we realized that it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. You've got some farmers who are in that situation that I was evoking, earlier. They may be trapped in this downward spiral. They need a certain sort of support to stay afloat. You've got other farmers who have all the will and ambition, but they may not have access to land, or they may not have the tools. And you have others that have the land, but they don't have the skills. So really tailoring our support to the different segments so that it is more efficient and effective for us and for them. And also, I would say a third one that's come out is really putting an emphasis on food security and nutrition. This is a natural thing for us, because even though not all of our crops are food crops, some are directly food crops like rice, others are cotton or cocoa, are not what you'd call your staple crops. And yet it's so important that those farmers have diversified incomes, that they have livelihood security, financial security, and food security. And so working on how we can support them to have access to, whether it's through training, through linkages to marketing programs for their other crops, training women's groups, for example, just to set up vegetable growing associations in conjunction with a savings association. So really working a lot more on that food security side. And finally, combining that food security side with a regenerative agriculture approach. So looking at how we can use that smart combination of crops and cover crops and food crops, and to regenerate soils.
Thank you very much, Julienne. I really appreciate your emphasis on food security and nutrition. As we know from reports that we've received from 2020 into 2021, over 100 million more people have slipped into food insecurity as a result of not just the global pandemic, but additional shocks and stresses around the world. There's conflicts around the world. Of course, we still have the desert locust to the east of Africa, fall armyworm in the south, other pests and diseases. And of course, again, we emphasize that we still have the devastating impact of climate change on food productivity. So it's important that beyond just looking exclusively at productivity, that organizations such as yourselves look at the externalities and take on food security and nutrition, especially nutrition, health and well-being. Again, not just of stakeholders within the supply chain, but of final consumers. Kagweria, welcome back. We lost you briefly, but again, I wanted to bring back this issue that we're seeing a common thread around the adoption of technology, information communications technology. Of course, for example, we're speaking in a webinar. This possibly may not have been the first option if we were to have this meeting, say, 2-3 years ago, but here we are, a global audience, everyone logging in, and we're starting to see the extension of these digital communications technologies to benefit agriculture supply chains, all the way down to farmers. Now, is there anything the Foundation's thinking of how we capitalize access or affordability of extending communications technologies across value chains? So whether it's making communication devices more affordable, or investing or supporting the de-risking of investments in ICT in rural areas, making the cost of energy, for example, cheaper, more accessible for farmers. We'd like to hear more from you.
Thank you, Debisi. So maybe I'll answer the question in two parts. First, I'll share with you what we're doing in terms of information can help DC. So I think in the presentation that Julie had shared, she shared that the economic impact is felt worse in sub-Saharan Africa. And in the countries that we've worked in, most of the 75% of the total workforce are actually informal laborers. So these workers lack that safety net system to fill that income void. And what we have seen is that with the loss of the earning opportunities, this is affecting food demand, and then you see negative coping strategies. So you're seeing less diverse diets, especially nourishing foods like fruits and vegetables. So in partnerships with several funders such as BMGF and the Foreign Office, what we're doing is working towards strengthening the food balance sheets with FAO to ensure that governments have the required information so that they can make effective policy decisions on food stake and also timely declaration of food crisis. But also for philanthropies like us, it's also important to have that information so that you're able to know where to deploy food relief more effectively. Then in terms of access to energy, one of the things, Rockefeller Foundation is probably one of the oldest foundations. Though we may not be the largest anymore in terms of our dollars, we still think we're one of the leading in terms of influence and convening. So we believe our role is to find innovative solutions to current problems and then take the risk to demonstrate so that other governments or large funders can continue to roll that out or expand or scale the solutions. So one of the things that we have made a big bet on following in September last year was the idea that if we were able to increase access to energy, then you're able to spark economic recovery. Based on this, we've actually made a bet and gone to the financial markets and gotten out a bond so that we can make investments on increasing access to energy, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. Our focus will be on ensuring that we're creating the connection between agriculture and energy, making investments of mechanization of agriculture, post-production in terms of cold storage, also e-mobility where applicable, and also mechanization of other processes such as rice threshing or all other activities that happen in agriculture. Thank you, WC.
Thanks, Kagweria. Now, Sam, sticking with the need for investing in infrastructure, communications, transportation, logistics, etc. We know that Africa has well, it's been said that Africa has $100 billion a year infrastructure gap. Is IFC, what's IFC's thinking about how we bridge this gap, and are there priority sectors that you think are more attractive right now in terms of whether it's transportation, ICT, and what are the prospects? Should we have a positive outlook on this, or is it going to remain a huge gap in the hundreds of billions of dollars? Over to you.
Yes, no, infrastructure is very important, not only for the agribusiness sector, but for virtually all the sectors. And as you point out, we all know that one of the biggest challenges to the development of our continent is just the lack of infrastructure. I mean, specifically, if you look at the agribusiness sector, it's obvious. I mean, where you produce food and where most often the markets are different. So you have to produce in one area and find ways and means of transporting economically to places where the markets are. So you need the roads. Some of the colleagues have already highlighted the issue of power, the issue of energy. If we need to process our agricultural produce, we need to have affordable electricity, affordable energy to be able to process. So infrastructure is the big issue. And at the IFC, we do have a whole department that the infrastructure department that is really focused on the sector. And every year we do very significant investments in the infrastructure sector. It is roads, it is power, And also the ports, and ports are also quite important, because once you start talking about export, for example, of agricultural produce, these have to go through the ports. You have to think about warehousing and storage at the port, at the ports, and so on. So these are all quite important, and our infrastructure group does do a lot of financing in that sector across Africa.
Thank you very much, Sam. Jihan, I want to talk a bit about the inputs market and how we look at the prospects going forward. Sam just talked about the logistics, and we know there's an infrastructure gap and infrastructure deficit, but still, you have to get products to consumers or your clients across the continent and possibly elsewhere around the world. Are there any challenges beyond, of course, yes, we know there's a global pandemic, but are there logistics challenges, whether through tariff, non-tariff barriers in countries that limit how deep or how deeply you can reach markets or consumers across the continent? And what are you doing to mitigate these?
So I wouldn't say that the major challenge today is, let's say, is on the logistics side for the coming years. There are, of course, some complications, especially across border countries, inland countries, landlocked countries. They have some difficulties because of the cost of transportation and the lack of actually having a good distribution SMEs that can handle that. But today, what we see, and which I feel a bit more alarming for the African market specifically, is that there is a spike in the pricing of fertilizer. As we've seen a spike in the pricing of food products, we also, as they are both correlated, the prices have almost doubled since last year. And it's going to be a very high challenge, because not only we've seen already a demand destruction. We know how important for Africa to improve its productivity in agriculture. We know about the Abuja targets that we are very struggling to reach out, and all the efforts. And unfortunately, the demand that has been created over the recent year is now being destructed because of the current situation. We've seen a decrease in the tenders, for example, from certain countries, which means a decrease in subsidized fertilizers, which means then even higher prices for fertilizer to farmers that are already suffering from decreasing income. So the prospect is not that, let's say, that's green, and we know that it will be a struggle and challenge to maintain a good productivity. Like we've seen in Julie Green, farmers are already complaining for a loss of productivity last year, and we believe it's going to be continuing also this year, because not only of the lack of availability of inputs, but also because of the pricing issues. But not to be like only having a kind of a gloomy picture to this. We are still believing in a bullish recovery, in the sense that we think that this crisis may also be an opportunity for us. As Julie said also in the introduction, it's in the worst crisis where we are really back at the back of the wall that the human being are the most creative and innovative, and this is where we can also kind of find new ways and improve our consumption patterns. And I believe that this is also a momentum for Made in Africa to also promote not only in the production of foods, but also in the production in a larger sense, like it be fertilizer production, but also other infrastructure needs. The gap, I think there is a momentum for today, because we see that it's not working. So we have to fast track some of the changes that are needed today to see modernization in our agriculture specifically, but also in other areas of the economic situation in the different countries. but also the change in the more eco-responsible consumption patterns. We've already seen that with the, I think it was Kagiwara that was specifying the urban markets that are kind of booming now. We have to have more shorter circuits, and for the fertilizer, for example, industry, which is our angle, we are now pushing for more and more localized production to get closer to the consumption markets, and also to minimize the effects in the production price costs. And so we do have blending projects in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, and also in Rwanda, in Cote d'Ivoire, but those are only examples of the type of move that we're trying to push. And digitalization, again, is a real solution and a change maker, I would say, a solution that can be applied for not only for the logistics, to be able to shorten the distance between us and the farmer, to give him access to some information and some key data that he doesn't have access to, improve his farm management, to de-risk some of the operations that we have, and at the end of the day also to improve the costing of some of the operations that we see. So we are investing heavily in R&D and in capacity building with the digitalization, that is one of our key strategic pillars today in our recovery exercise for the coming years.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gian. I loved what Kagweria had mentioned earlier, and making big bets, and also you're saying you're bullish on a strong recovery. That gives cause to see out the rest of this year with confidence and look towards a more prosperous 2021. Iffy, looking at SMEs and the support that SMEs require, we've received a question here. How can SMEs that require financing, is there a platform that those who might want to provide capital to SMEs, is there a platform that they may connect with these SMEs? And I think Nourishing Africa is probably best place for this. So over to you. Can you explain how you bring people together to get this done?
Happy to. So Nourishing Africa is that platform that the person who asked the question is looking for. We are a knowledge and membership platform where we bring SMEs across the board, across the value chain from farm to fork together. We provide training and ongoing support, particularly investment readiness, because we work with a range of different financiers and grant supporters who are looking for SMEs to support, but they just are not at the stage where they can do so. So our aim is to provide that capacity building, the ongoing support and the investment readiness for these SMEs to be positioned where they can then receive further funding to scale their businesses. So go to nourishingafrica.com and I'll be happy to put my email in the chat box, and happy to go forward with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Iffy. And so there you have it. Please go to nourishingafrica.com and you will find the support or the information that you require. Julie, this has been a really engaging conversation. Again, we cannot, we express our sincere gratitude and appreciation to Olam, an African business, for putting this webinar together, but to Olam specifically for organizing the survey and bringing out these strong data points that indicate not just the status of what's going on in the farming sector, but how farmers are responding to the global pandemic. And we hope that in the months and years to come, that the lessons that we learn from this helps to build resilience right across our agri-food sector. So Julie, I'd like to give you the floor for a final word before we wrap up this afternoon.
Sure, thank you. And it's been really great to speak with everybody this afternoon, coming from different sides and different perspectives of the food system, and to know all about the great work that you're doing. And I'd really like to, reiterate what others have also said. We have a positive future but we've got to work together. We've got to be creative to find the solutions that really address challenges of farmers where they're at, challenges of the systems, whether it's information systems, whether it's logistics systems. And I believe that we can overcome this, but it takes all of our brains and efforts together. So really all my thanks and also encouragement to everybody on the panel and out there listening to carry on. And we're going to get through this, and I'm sure that we're going to have a stronger food system and agricultural system as a result.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'd like to end this with a famous Ethiopian proverb that says, when spiders unite, they can tie down lions. And so there is no challenge that we cannot overcome if we come together. With that, I would like to thank our eminent speakers today for giving us your time, for the contributions you've made. For the members of the audience, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for listening. To the organizers, African Business and Olam, of course, thank you very much for organizing this session. We say thank you very much and have a good day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.